Ethan Walker never planned to play the role of a hero that evening. All he wanted was a quiet dinner with his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, at the small corner diner they often visited after long workdays at his auto shop. The smell of fried food and fresh coffee filled the air, neon lights buzzed faintly above the booths, and Lily was already giggling over the whipped cream piled high on her milkshake when the bell above the door jingled and a sharply dressed young man walked in, looking distinctly out of place among the casual crowd. His expensive suit and polished shoes didn't match the worn leather booths or laminated menus, and while he politely asked the waitress for a table, his eyes carried attention that Ethan immediately noticed. Before the waitress could respond, 3 rugged men intercepted him, shoving him toward a booth in the back. Ethan's instincts sharpened as he watched the exchange unfold. He caught bits and pieces of their conversation, harsh words like, money, last chance, and, you'll regret this, floating through the air, and he could see the stranger trying to remain calm while his hands trembled slightly against the table. Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve and whispered, Daddy, those men are being mean, and though he gave her a small smile to reassure her, his chest tightened with unease. One of the men slammed his fist down, rattling plates, and the stranger's eyes darted around desperately until, for the briefest moment, they locked with Ethan's. That single glance carried something Ethan recognized all too well, fear mixed with the silent plea of someone trapped. It reminded him of Lily's eyes years ago when she'd been sick, helpless and vulnerable, and he had been the only one standing between her and the world. Ethan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts rising to the surface. He told himself it wasn't his fight, but his legs betrayed him, pushing him up from the booth as if by instinct. With steady strides, he approached the corner table, ignoring the stares of other diners, and positioned himself between the stranger and the 3 men. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke, carrying the weight of someone who had faced down hardship before. Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen. The diner went silent, forks paused mid-air, and all eyes turned to the single dad in work boots and a worn jacket who had just stepped into a storm that wasn't his, but very soon would be. The silence in the diner stretched thin, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan as the 3 men turned their attention to Ethan, smirks curling across their faces like wolves amused by a lone sheep daring to bark. Walk away, mechanic, one of them sneered, eyeing Ethan's calloused hands and grease-stained jacket, this isn't your fight. But Ethan didn't flinch, he planted his boots firmly, his voice steady and sharp as he replied, I said, wrong table. He's done with you. A ripple of tension ran through the diner. Waitresses froze mid-step, customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and from her booth, little Lily watched with wide eyes, clutching her milkshake straw as if it were a lifeline. The largest of the men rose slowly, towering over Ethan, trying to intimidate him with sheer size, but Ethan had faced giants before, both on construction sites and in the struggles life had thrown his way, and he didn't so much as blink. When the man reached out to grab his shoulder, Ethan's reflexes kicked in. He twisted the wrist with practiced precision and shoved the man back into the booth so hard that the salt shaker toppled over and clattered to the floor. The other 2 lunged at him, but Ethan met them head-on. His movements were quick, efficient, and purposeful, hinting at a past that carried more than just long hours at the auto shop. Chairs screeched against the floor, dishes shattered as they tumbled off tables, and gasps filled the diner as the fight escalated, yet Ethan's mind remained clear. He wasn't fighting to prove himself, he was fighting because Lily was watching, and he would never let her see him back down to bullies. Within minutes, the 3 men realized this wasn't the easy intimidation they had expected. Bruised and cursing, they staggered toward the exit, spitting threats about how this wasn't over before disappearing into the night. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, knuckles raw, his protective fire still burning, then slowly turned to the stranger who had remained frozen in his seat. You okay? Ethan asked gruffly, brushing the dust from his sleeves. The young man straightened his expensive suit, his eyes filled with a mix of shock and gratitude, and with a voice that carried both awe and secrecy, he murmured, You have no idea what you just did for me. Ethan shrugged it off, muttering, Didn't do it for you. Just don't like bullies, before returning to his daughter, unaware that his life had just veered onto a path he never saw coming. The next morning, Ethan arrived early at his auto shop, still nursing the ache in his knuckles from the diner scuffle, hoping the hum of engines and the smell of motor oil would drown out the unease lingering in his chest. He had chalked the whole thing up to being in the wrong place at the wrong time, convincing himself those men had probably moved on, but that illusion shattered when two sleek black SUVs rolled to a stop outside his shop, their polished frames gleaming under the sun. Ethan's stomach dropped, his first thought being that the thugs had come back for revenge, but as the tinted windows slid down, men in tailored suits stepped out, calm, professional, and carrying an air of authority that screamed power rather than street brawling. From the back of the lead vehicle emerged the same stranger from the diner, no longer looking cornered but instead composed and confident, his presence commanding respect. "Mr. Walker," he said warmly, extending a hand, "I owe you an explanation." Ethan wiped his greasy palms on a rag, frowning. "Look, I don't want trouble. Whatever mess you're in, keep me and my daughter out of it." But the man only smiled, unoffended, and introduced himself. "My name is Adrian Steele. I'm the CEO of Steele Enterprises." The name hit Ethan like a wrench to the gut. Steele Enterprises wasn't just any company, it was the company, a global empire known for its wealth, influence, and untouchable reputation. Ethan blinked in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the powerful businessman before him with the cornered man he had defended in a greasy diner. Adrian's tone softened as he explained, "Last night wasn't random. Those men aren't just thugs, they're tied to a network that's been trying to pressure me into dirty deals. I have bodyguards and security, but they protect me because they're paid to. You, however, stepped in without hesitation, without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return. That speaks volumes about your character." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, uneasy with the weight of attention. "I'm just a mechanic," he muttered. "I've got bills, I've got a kid, and I want no part in some corporate war." Adrian studied him carefully, then said with quiet conviction, "Maybe so. But men like you, honest, brave, and unshakably protective, are rare. And I don't forget the people who stand by me when it matters most. Something tells me, Mr. Walker, this isn't the last time our paths will cross." In the weeks that followed, Ethan tried to push the diner incident to the back of his mind, but traces of Adrian Steele's influence kept surfacing like ripples in a pond he hadn't meant to disturb. The waitress at the diner whispered to him one night that a man in a fine suit had left an anonymous donation to keep the struggling community center open, and his name had been attached to the gift. Lily came home from school grinning ear to ear, proudly waving a letter that her tuition had been covered in full for the year, and Ethan knew without asking who was behind it. Still, he told himself to keep his head down, to focus on work and raising his daughter, until one evening Adrian himself walked into the diner, this time without a trace of the tension that had marked their first meeting. He sat across from Ethan and Lily, his gaze steady but softened, and after a moment of silence he leaned forward. "Ethan," he began, "I've been thinking. Men like you don't come around often, men who step in for what's right without hesitation. I could use someone like you, not as an employee, but as someone I can trust." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unused to the idea of being courted by a man whose world was built on power and wealth, and his first instinct was to refuse. His whole life had been about scraping by, turning wrenches, patching bills together, and raising Lily with more love than money could buy. But when he looked at her, her bright eyes, her carefree smile, the way she leaned against his side without fear of the world, he felt a pang of something deeper, a longing to give her more, to secure a future where she never had to worry the way he had. Slowly, he extended his hand across the table, his voice low but steady. "All right, Mr. Steele, but just so we're clear, I'm not doing this for power, or money. I'm doing it for her." Adrian's expression softened into something almost fatherly as he clasped Ethan's hand firmly. "That's exactly why you're the kind of man I need by my side," he replied. And as Lily giggled over her milkshake, blissfully unaware of how her world was about to change, Ethan realized that one impulsive act of courage had led him to a crossroads that promised not just survival, but a new beginning.